The stream is live and we're ready to go. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
And we are working our way through the AFI's top 100 movies list. We've been doing it for a long time because frequently we're very slow between episodes. We recently went through the 2020 Oscar winners, but tonight we're back to our regular format, continuing our journey through the top 100 American movies. And tonight's movies, we're talking about number 22, Some Like It Hot, and number 21, Chinatown. Two great movies that we're going to talk about. But let's go ahead and start with number 22, Some Like It Hot. Screwball comedy from Billy Wilder from 1959, starring Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis and Marilyn Monroe. I really like this movie.
Yeah, I mean it is a really funny movie.
Yeah. So, if anyone hasn't seen it, the basic premise of Some Like It Hot is it's a premise that I feel like the high level summary of it feels extremely hackneyed and potentially offensive, but the movie itself, I think, transcends whatever superficial impressions the premise might suggest. But the basic idea is that you have Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, who are friends, they're musicians, and they accidentally witness a mob massacre and have to go on the run by dressing as female musicians and joining an all-girls band. And so that is the plot of the movie, basically, is they have to try to keep up their pretense, and then eventually they have other shenanigans going on that lead them to try to keep up the pretense. And then when the mobsters actually show up down at this Florida resort where they've been performing with the girls band, everything blows up, and it's a lot of fun.
It is. I mean, it is just a really fun movie. I mean, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon are phenomenal in it. Like, their characters are so funny. And yeah, and also, I mean, I think part of the reason the movie's on this the list is that it, for a movie to be made like this in like 1959, and
Well,
while
go ahead.
they're not cross-dressing because they're not gay, but it's about as far as you could lean in.
Yeah, I definitely want to. Oh, sorry, you hung up a little bit,
No,
so
go
we're
ahead.
talking.
You want to talk about it? Yeah. I mean, I think my feeling is it was as far as you could lean in 1959.
Yeah.
But still maintain that it wasn't that. It's
Right.
not the bird.
So the one thing we certainly have to acknowledge is that for a variety of reasons, probably some of them like quote unquote enforceable, but then others that were just a desire to avoid controversy. The idea of even acknowledging that such a thing as homosexuality or transgender or even cross dressing as a like an enthusiasm, a kink, I guess. I mean, other than just the literal act of a man putting on women's clothes. I mean, like the movie, that was a no-go zone. The movie was not even going to be able to acknowledge the existence of such a thing. But at the same time, because this is Billy Wilder, this is not just any random comedy writer director who is churning out 100 of the like a dozen movies a year. Like this guy has, I think, does he have the most movies on the list? I can't remember if he's the most, but he certainly has a lot, right? Because he has The Apartment, Sunset Boulevard is his too, I think. I'm suddenly blanking on all of his, but it's let's see. The Apartment was his. Sunset Boulevard is his. Some Like It's Hot is his. There's, I think, a fourth one. Double Indemnity was also his.
Yep.
Um, Actually, is that right? Double Indemnity. I just looked. He did a TV movie of Double Indemnity, but I'm pretty sure. Oh man, hang on. Yes, he did do Double Indemnity. Yes, he did do Sunset Boulevard. Um, and then The Apartment and this one are the four that he has on the list. I don't recall if anyone else has four, but the point is,
Scorsese would be the only one,
yeah,
maybe.
Raging Bull and Goodfellas and
Both Godfathers.
Scorsese, Coppola did Godfathers, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I mean, there's similar genre. There's overlap there.
Yeah. Who did The Deer Hunter?
I don't think he did The Deer Hunter.
No, I don't think he did either, but it kind of caught me.
Oh. In any event, Billy Wilder makes good movies. The guy,
yeah.
He is a talented filmmaker and screenwriter, and he took this premise, which could easily have just been, isn't it silly and funny and scandalous and outrageous to make broad comedy about these men dressing as women's clothes and all the sorts of things, like the the idea of like, oh, you get to see the girls undress and that sort of thing, right? Like, you could have made a movie, like, frankly, those movies have been made, right? Like the idea of men having to pretend that they're women for whatever reason has been made over and over again. There's lots of them, right?
Right.
There's another one on this list, Tootsie, right? Like, although that one is also, I think, well made and not sort of just, played for, the broad, outrageous comedy or anything like that. But working within the limitations of not being able to acknowledge things like homosexuality or any of that stuff, they managed to get just to that line and make the line funny. Like, I think the closest that they get in a whole movie is when Jack Lemmon's character as Daphne has gotten swept off his feet by this rich millionaire and is literally excited about the prospect of marrying him and understands it's going to be a little complicated on the day. There's going to have to be a tough conversation, but is nonetheless intending to go through with it. And they're having the argument about it. And Tony Curtis ends up saying, like, why would a man ever want to marry another man? And Jack Lemmon says, security. And so that's, I think, as close as it ever gets, right?
And it kind of bails itself out really quickly in that it tries to make it seem like he only wants to do it so that he'll get the alimony checks.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, that's not what's happening.
We see how he's acting.
Right. He's so excited. Like,
yeah, he danced with him all night.
Right. And that's the transition of like him grumpily agreeing to go along and then stern-faced, like, participating in the dances and getting scolded by Osgood for continuing to try to lead, to starting to kind of enjoy dancing, to celebrating that they had so much
still dancing and singing to himself back in the hotel room afterwards.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So when it has the whole, like, and then I'll be cashing the alimony checks, it's like, yeah, all right, we see what you did there. You put that in there just so that no one could say that you had it set up this way. And and then the final line of the movie, which is amazing, is played as it's a joke, So when he reveals himself to be a man, and the guy's like, well, nobody's perfect.
Right. Well, and the way that it all builds, like he keeps trying to say, it's like, I can't get married. I wouldn't fit your mom's wedding dress. We can have it altered. I smoke. I don't care. I can't have children. We can adopt some.
Yeah.
And then finally, I'm a man. He's frustrated, tears the wig off. Nobody's perfect. And it's such a great end line. But what's also great about it, other than being hilarious, because it is that it totally sidesteps that unpleasant nowadays offensive idea of like, ew, oh yuck, oh a man, ew, like that whole sort of thing, right?
Right.
Like that horrified reaction, like, oh God, I've been kissing a man. I was thinking I was going to marry a man. Ew, like that we could imagine a much lesser movie doing that because of course it's happened over and over again, right? Like
Hmm.
lots of movies have used it that way, but to subvert it like that is not only better in a lot of ways, but it's also funnier.
Yeah. I think one of the comedies that I feel like handled it the worst is probably Ace Ventura.
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, you, they were trying to like. I mean, I get like the movie was had a different tone.
Mm-hmm.
But the joke. I mean, they were trying to make fun of the crying game, but
Yeah.
it falls so flat to me, and
Yeah.
especially now, like I watch that and I'm like, God, this is just disgusting. Like, that they thought this was funny.
Yeah.
When this movie did such this. I mean, not the same thing, but to your point, like it, they just do it so much. Everything about it is so more clever.
Yeah. Well, like,
And you just love, like you're happy watching it, like and you're not gonna be offended. Like you get the joke because Osgood is kind of a goofy dude, also. So like
mm-hmm.
he can say these screwy things and it not be taken very seriously in the context of the movie. But if you lift what happened out of there, like he fell in love with Jack Lemmon.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Lemmon fell in love with him, and yeah, it was complicated because one of them was pretending to be a woman. But at the end of the day, like they loved each other, and that's what they're
Yeah.
gonna go do. That's what you end up with, but like it's never addressed like that, you
Yeah.
know. So
Well, and the thing too that I like another aspect of it that is so well crafted is there would be an element where do we feel bad about Osgood being tricked? No, because it's set up from the beginning that not only is he a little bit of a lech to begin with, but also he establishes he doesn't even remember how many times he's been married because this is like a pastime for him. And he enjoys it, but it's not something that he's going to have his heart broken over.
right, yeah. So we're not super sympathetic to him in
Or
this, or
it's
we,
not
we
even
are, but in a different way. Yeah,
right.
like
It's we're not worried about him,
right.
right? We can like him. We can find him kind of endearing in a way, even if he's a little bit of a rascal. But like we're not worried he's going to have his heart broken or his feelings hurt, right?
No, and part of it, like, it's kind of fun that you have him being kind of a rascal
Mm-hmm.
because you have to see Jack Lemmon get treated to what women sort of like just account for,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, like the other flip side of what we were just talking about is in a lot of these other movies where this scenario presents itself, you also have the ew gross result of the character who's dressed as a woman having to fend off these male advances and having it be ew gross. But it's not presented like that here either, right? Like there's the whole like you pinch my butt in the elevator, but that's immediately met with a slap to the face and an immediate like that's unacceptable behavior. It's not going to be proceeded. And at that point, the guy takes the lesson and says, "Oh, well, maybe he's still a little pushy, like he's clear he could have just not pursued anymore, but he certainly changed his behavior after that, right? He was a lot more sort of like respectful and like I'm going to set up this whole elaborate thing, going to all this trouble, as opposed to pinching you in the butt in the elevator."
right,
But it's not present. It's presented as like he doesn't want to do it, but he's sort of forced into it because of whole Tony Curtis's whole shenanigans, which we'll get into in a moment. But at the same time, there's never a point where it's like, oh, gross, I have to pretend to go on a date with a man. Like, it's not like that. It's more just like this guy's annoying. I don't want to have to deal with him.
Right.
But then
I don't want to
he
go on
starts
this
to charm.
Yeah.
I was even going to say her. Starts to charm Daphne, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But so we also have, so we begin the movie, of course, establishing, like, because it's a ways into the movie that it doesn't.
I actually had this as a note. Like
Yeah.
it's amazing how long the setup is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 30 minutes before they, which on a 2-hour movie, I mean, it's a quarter of the movie that they spend not doing any of this.
Yeah. Is it that long? I didn't actually look at the timer, but it
I
certainly.
did because it kind of caught me. I was like, man, there is a lot of setup.
Mm-hmm.
So I did pause it when they finally like got on the train.
Oh yeah.
And it was like 31 or 33 minutes
Wow.
or whatever, and
Yeah. Well, it establishes it's in kind of the act breaks are like I just watched a video that I really recommend everyone. This is from a online film writer who goes by Film Crit Hulk. Recommend all their stuff, but they just did a video about why Star Wars works, and they're talking about like all the ways that the original Star Wars movies put together that make it effective. And one of the things he talks about is how we over rely on the terminology of act breaks when usually what it really is just different sequences. And so in this context, we have a lot of stuff to establish about these characters and who they are and what they're like before we get to that point, right? So
right.
because we have a whole opening sequence with a lot of fun stuff in it that doesn't even have anything to do with our main characters except that it establishes these mobsters, right?
Right, and the time frame, it gives us the fact that it's the 20s. Prohibition exists. They are talented, but they have to take these like gigs that are below themselves because they kind of are these never do wells. It establishes a lot more than you would think, being that it is unrelated technically to the rest of the movie. The fact that they're performing in the speakeasy.
Well, and the thing is too that like I don't know if it's just a Billy Wilder thing or if we could just try to say that it's just a skilled filmmaker thing that so like the temptation to have secondary characters be generic is something that this movie never lets itself be that lazy, right? Like every little character has something going on, right? Like you have all these different mobsters who all have their own weird little quirks. And then you have, Spats, that mobster, and then there's, like Toothpick Charlie, and then, the cop who, our musicians see that he's a cop because he takes out his badge and uses the pin to sort of like start a cigar. And it's just like, and in the middle of that raid, you have the guy who's like, I just want another cup of coffee. And it's just like all of this texture that really has nothing to do with the plot in broad strokes. Like you could have had generic mobster number 3, or you could have had just Spats be interesting and then he just has 4 random schmoes around him. But instead you have all of these different guys that each kind of are doing their own little thing. It's not from this first sequence, but I have to say, I think my biggest laugh in the whole movie actually is the bit where the mobsters have showed up in Florida and they're searching them for weapons. And the one guy has these big baggy golf pants on and the guy's patting him down and he opens up a leg and a gun just falls out of the leg of his pants. And he says, it's not loaded. And then the guy goes to get the other leg and a bunch of loose bullets fall out.
It has all the bullets. And yeah, the fact that they're like loose bullets, not like in a clip or anything.
Yeah. and just the timing of it, it's so funny. I just laughed out loud. Like it's such a moment of joy. And it's just total, it's unrelated to the plot at all, except that we're just establishing who these mobsters are and that it's funny. They're funny at the same time that we get why they're scary and we want to want our
Right.
guys to get away.
And there's like this totally nonsensical one right after that, like where the guy has the Tommy gun in the golf bag with like a driver head on it,
Yeah. And he
and it's
says,
like
it's my wedgie.
it's my yeah, it just doesn't even make sense that you
I
would
know.
store a gun like that, but
Well,
it's just funny, you know.
and so
Yeah.
they talk weird too. Like when we're at this speakeasy section, like they're all drinking milk, but the one guy just goes buttermilk, and he just says it in such a weird way that's just like, why did he say it like that? Because it's more interesting that he did than if he just said, like, why, and why buttermilk? Why is it not just milk? Because buttermilk is funnier. That's why, right? You know,
Yep.
it's that sort of texture and detail, and it's like all stuff that, in theory, doesn't matter, but makes the movie better.
Right. Well, even the whole thing with like you made the joke about the guy just wanting another cup of coffee. Like there's layers to that joke that just don't need to be in the movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
when the cop comes in and says like they're like, "Oh, what do you want?" He's like, "Booze," because obviously it's a speakeasy, and the
Mm-hmm.
waiter says, "Well, we only serve coffee here." And then he proceeds to list off the types of coffee, which are
Rye
all
coffee,
yeah, exactly.
sour mash coffee.
But then so that's the first layer is
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like there's a sort of clever, like you have to play the game, you know, you order a, you know, scotch coffee,
Mm-hmm.
but then they bring it in a coffee mug.
Yeah.
So you get layer number two, like, oh, this is, they're like really leaning into this, like,
Mm-hmm.
just you get the guy saying, I just want another cup of coffee when he's getting kicked out for being drunk.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, there's three layers to the joke that have no essence in the
Mm-hmm.
plot of the movie other than it makes it interesting and funny, you
Yeah.
know?
And so, and then we finally meet, and this is all after having the whole setup of the funeral parlor that's hiding the speakeasy, booze bottles in the coffin, all that good stuff. But then we finally meet our musicians. We have Joe, played by Tony Curtis, and Jerry, played by Jack Lemmon. And they're very quickly established as, you know, the slightly more sensible one who gets talked into the crazy stuff by the other. You know, so Joe's the one that's kind of saying, how are you going to do a responsible thing like get your tooth filled with this money that we're getting when you know that we have back rent and we owe money here, here, and here, and we borrowed money from all the girls, and so his proposal is instead we should take this paycheck and go and bet it on a horse.
Dog.
It was like grease lightning. Was it a dog or?
Yeah, it was
Okay,
dogs.
yeah, okay. So, in the point of gambling it though is like, and the humor of the line of they have had to give up their overcoats to get the money to make the bet because they get chased out of the nightclub. And then it's like, but the dog plays 10 to 1, pays 10 to 1, we'll get you 20 overcoats. And just like, it's just a funny line.
Right.
And the whole, yeah, and then there's the whole sequence where we see them going into the building where there's the multiple talent agencies, and they're literally just going down the line in the hallway and checking each one. Anything? No. Okay. Anything? No. And then the one that says, "Oh, it's you," and they're like, "Oh, good," and they're like, "You got a lot of nerve," because of course it's yet another girl that he has stood up and everything, and then he basically tricks her into loaning the car, and that's how they end up in the garage where the massacre happens, and it's all like follows very naturally. None of it feels contrived. You know, like the only real moment of like contrivance, which we don't mind because it's the whole premise of the movie, is the idea that okay, well, this girl's band happens to need a saxophone player and a bull fiddle player, which are the two instruments that these guys play.
Right.
Yeah. But, you know, we got, again, it's like every character who has any lines at all gets more to them than a lesser movie would have given them. Because there's a whole lot of these roles that could have been boring. Like the talent agent, right? He could have just been, oh, I have this job, but it's only for girl musicians, and it's like, oh well, and then like could have been just total exposition, boring line delivery, but instead we get to have him have this whole flustered, frustrated phone call where he's trying to reach all these other people and they're not doing it, and then he's talking about, like, oh well, we can't get this one because she got pregnant. We can't get that one because she cut her wrists when Valentino died. And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
And so it's hilarious just watching all of these little sequences. But then of course they witness the murder and have to go on the run, which leads us into the actual premise. And then of course we meet Marilyn Monroe as Sugar Cane, as changed from Sugar Kowalczyk, I think is what she says.
Kowalski, yeah.
Is it Kowalski? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. But Marilyn Monroe. It's we talked about this when she had the tiny little part in All About Eve, right? Was it All About Eve?
Yes.
Yeah. She just you just watch her on screen and she's got that movie star thing. I mean, it was kind of unfortunate, like that in some ways she didn't handle the fame as well. And there was a lot else going on. I don't want to pretend like I know everything about Marilyn Monroe's life, but certainly, lost her too soon, given how talented she was.
Yep.
But I gather, though, that there were certainly, how talented she was in terms of having that charisma and that movie star presence, as opposed to being great at memorizing lines and that sort of thing. But she's lots of fun. And so, like, she's another character that, we talk about. One of the things that's kind of a trope in movies is the idea of if you can replace the female character in a movie with a sexy lamp, you can tell you don't have a well-written character. The point being, sexy lamp is just the idea that frequently the character's only real trait is that the guy wants to sleep with her. You know what I mean? But in this case, like, she's got her own sort of running commentary where, like, she's got the self-deprecating thing at the same time as wanting better. It's like she's tired of getting the fuzzy end of the lollipop, but she also totally owns how it's always her fault. And just that the whole funny bit about Tony Curtis as Josephine is listening to her talk about how it's like, you know what, I just fall for those saxophone players, those bad boy saxophone players every single time. And it's like, I just can't help it. And he's having to say, oh, really? Oh. But then, of course, she explains the whole millionaire bit. No, this time we're going to go to Florida. I'm going to marry a millionaire, and they have to have a yacht. I like to wear glasses, and so it's setting up the whole bit for Josephine, or Joe, aka Josephine's other persona. How about Tony Curtis doing a Cary Grant impersonation as his millionaire character? How funny is that? I just think that's amazing.
It is super funny. But that part is probably maybe the most complicated in the movie for me. Like,
well, it's true. It's kind of a shitty thing for him to be doing.
Right. And so that it's like the one thing that just like kind of rings a little false, because we're fans of Tony Curtis in the movie. We're fans of Marilyn Monroe. We want them to be together. The fact that he didn't use the saxophone part of it is kind of clever and makes it a little different.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, he's pretending to be exactly the kind of person that he thinks she wants to marry and sleep with, when it's not really who he is. And it just, I don't know. There's just like,
and he also bullies Jerry into doing stuff he doesn't want to do to help him.
Yep.
And takes advantage of his, like, so yeah, there's no question.
Manipulates her, like, with the whole, like, I mean, I know it's funny, but like the whole, like, oh, women just don't arouse me, and like.
Yeah, well, that was another bit where you sort of feel like if this was a movie that was allowed to acknowledge the existence of homosexuality, that's kind of the obvious place that conversation would go, except that they can't, because it doesn't, because it can't.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like
I forgive it. But it just
hmm,
it's a hard part for me because
I
I love so much of the movie. I don't love that he tricks her and that he gets away
yeah,
with it because he just does. Like I feel like that's maybe of the contrived parts.
yeah,
I feel like that's maybe the most contrived is when he kisses her as Josephine and she like all of a sudden realizes that he's this guy but not exactly this guy but she's just okay with all of this.
yeah.
That one is probably worse for me, like and all that. But again, it doesn't deflate the movie. I just felt like I needed to say it because it's the only part that bugs me.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, I think that that is certainly one of the more difficult. It's certainly, of all the stuff going on in the movie, it's really the only part where like there's funny stuff happening around it, but that actual element of the plot is not in itself funny. And I think the movie knows that. Like there's a couple of moments where it really kind of gets a little more serious briefly. And I feel like I for me I feel like it comes around. It's building a tension and a suspense there that we know what he's doing is not okay. And I mean, the movie highlights that it's not okay by having Jerry, aka Daphne, also frequently commenting on how it's not okay,
Yep.
right? And kind of constantly trying to sabotage him by having Daphne say, if I had a man do that to me, what a louse, that sort of thing,
Yes.
and keeps trying to bust him.
There are some great,
Whoop, I
yeah.
lost you there a little bit. You broke up.
No, I was just saying there are some great moments
Yeah,
where with him trying to bust him
yeah,
and like it's really funny because he doesn't ever want to come out and just say like
mm-hmm.
he's doing this, but like even from the beginning when he's like when she makes the like offhanded comment of like I can't wait to tell Josephine. You know what? Let's
We
go
should
tell
tell
her
him
right now.
right now. Yeah, let's go right
Right.
now. And they run back, and then and there's this funny bit. It's like they are seeing Josephine in the bathtub, all the bubbles and everything, and Sugar is like, oh, and he has a yacht. And it's like, and Jack Lemon's like, and a bicycle. Like he beat us back to the hotel apparently, and
Yeah.
then the reveal
And
when
then
she
he
leaves
goes
that he
by her
stands up.
bicycle.
Well, and but the reveal too that he was in there with the wig, but still wearing all of the millionaire clothes in the bathtub.
Yes.
Great stuff. But like so, but what my point was is that I feel like it builds some dramatic tension there with the realization that I think the movie shares that what he's doing is not an okay thing to be doing, but he finds that his feelings do start to develop to the point where they're having to go on the run and they're talking about how this diamond bracelet is literally like the only thing that they have going for them. Their lives are in danger, but he feels so bad for having to leave Sugar the way that that's all happening that he decides to just give it to her.
Right.
Which, again, like the
When
context
he
of all of it.
established him as the guy who would hawk their overcoats on a dog.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And to
So that's
give,
why those throwaway things actually have a payoff at the
mm-hmm,
end. Like,
yeah.
you know,
And so I feel like the tension that is built with him being so, shady earlier on, I think resolves itself in, like maybe not for everybody, but like I feel like that's where it comes down with that is that he comes to a place where he realizes he feels for her enough that he, is willing to sacrifice something that would have before been all he wanted. And that his feelings are for her are so strong that even as they're fleeing the hotel, running for their lives, and he's still in the Josephine getup, he kisses Sugar right there in front of everybody.
yeah,
Which again is like another moment where it's like in a movie universe where homosexuality exists, it's a whole different sort of like, all we get really is Sweet Sue, the leader of this women's band, just going, ah, she yells for her, manager. What's he supposed to do? I don't know. But the point is that he is so moved by his feeling for her that, he's saying goodbye and feeling bad about it and having left the diamonds with her. Something that occurred to me just now is, where do the diamonds end up at the end? Does she have them when she comes after them to get in the boat?
I guess she would.
I mean, she might, but it's certainly not established that she does.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe she was wearing the bracelet. I don't recall. But they don't make a point of it. He doesn't ask about it or anything. But, yeah, so, like, that whole bit, I feel like it comes around to kind of a sweet place where he's actually telling her there at the end, you don't want to come after me. You don't want to chase me. I am that same guy who you said you didn't want anymore. I'm not good enough for you. And for him to have come to a place where he really feels that, and to have her kind of like, go on, keep talking me out of it. And she kisses him some more. Like, I agree. There's a little bit of like, she forgives him pretty fast. Should she really be with him? Yeah, I agree that there's some wiggle room there. But,
Right. And ultimately I'm okay with it. I just, it's the hardest part. Yeah. It's the only part of the movie that I don't love.
Yeah.
And I don't hate it. I just love so much of the rest of the movie that part's always just kind of like,
yeah.
Because it's funny, like there is hilarious, like, and so you feel like, I feel extra bad that he's like manipulating her when all of the parts about it are so funny. Like when he has to drive the boat backwards to the yacht. Or when he makes like he's like flustered and just like, I think I'm out of gas, and she goes, well, that's ironic, the shell will thing. And like, I didn't even think about that. Neither did he. Like he forgot this whole pretense. Like he just flustered and was just inventing shit. And then he has to drive it in reverse, and then he keeps opening like random doors on the yacht.
Yeah,
like, I mean. Fun things.
It's from the earlier scene, but how much do you love? In this economy, I don't believe anyone should have a yacht that sleeps more than 12. She's like, oh, yeah, I agree. Because the thing is, she lies to him in that scene, too, and he knows it. Because she's saying, like, oh, I'm one of the, like, co-eds from, like, Vassar. Like, that's what she tells him.
Right.
Which, it's not equivalent, but I just think it's so funny that he's doing a Cary Grant impression. And of course we get Jack Lemmon saying, and what's with that crazy voice? Nobody talks like that. And of course, like when the movie was made, it would have been all the more on the nose, right? Like, I mean, we recognize it now because we've seen movies with Cary Grant, but it would have been obvious then. It would have been like, gosh, who's even the equivalent today? I'm not sure I can think of one today. I would, like Jack Nicholson could have been one, but that's still from, like Jack Nicholson 20 years ago, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's tough. Yeah.
But I think that's a lot of fun. We see, what else have we talked about? I mean, the whole business with we see before the debut of the billionaire character that we see him setting it all up with stealing the band director's or the band manager's bag and his glasses. And, all of that stuff gets, planted earlier before he finally pulls them all out. And then we get the whole final sequence with, more, like they witness yet another mob massacre. By accident, all just the craziness of them climbing out the window to escape the guys and end up climbing right down onto the balcony right outside where the mob guys are talking. This movie is just, it just works. It's so funny, and I am in awe at how well it manages to uh, age so well compared to a lot of its contemporaries, or frankly, movies made 10 years ago, you know, in terms of being kind of, even at the same time that it's unable to even acknowledge the existence of something like homosexuality or transgender or anything like that, it somehow manages to be surprisingly sensitive to those things regardless.
One of the best movies to tackle that subject
Yeah.
while not tackling that subject. Like it's unbelievable. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
said like it leans as far in as you possibly could in the 50s, which makes it still pretty prescient.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
It,
So,
mm-hmm. It's that Billy Wilder touch. Oh, the other sequence I was going to mention was just the train car party in the
yeah,
birth.
that's really good. Yeah, super funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, so it's all just fun. I mean, I don't know. There's not a lot of other like serious stuff to talk about. I mean, we could talk about like, you know, like did it win awards and stuff? Actually, let me pull that up. Uh, I don't have that. I always have trouble finding. You know, IMDb always moves their little things around. Um, let's see. Awards. So it won Best Costume Design Black and White, and nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role Jack Lemmon, Best Director Billy Wilder, Best Adapted Screenplay. Apparently, it's an adapted screenplay from Billy Wilder and IAL Diamond. Best Cinematography Black and White, because I guess it was separate categories then, and Best Art Direction Set Decoration in 1960. The It lost. So Jack Lemmon lost Best Actor to Charlton Heston and Ben-Hur,
Mm.
which yeah,
Different
okay,
performances. Yeah.
yeah. Let's see what the Best Picture was that year. Um,
As far as
best.
production design though, I'm
Oh,
pretty
it
sure
had to have been Ben-Hur, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
It's filmed in San Diego, I think.
What? Some Like It Hot?
Yeah.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I guess
Pretty
so.
sure that hotel. I'm pretty sure they used the Hotel Del Coronado
Oh,
on
okay.
Coronado Beach in San Diego, which is, I mean, it's a phenomenal looking hotel because it has a unique, like,
It looks very Florida.
yes, but I'm pretty sure it's in San Diego.
Okay.
If you're on the page, you can probably confirm that.
I'm still trying to see what the Best Picture winner was that year. Um,
You hear Rocket?
I do.
No, he does. He does too.
Um,
My dog's growling. You hear Rocket.
oh no.
Oh,
Um,
that dog, you won't get that local.
all right, Rocket. I don't know why you're barking all of a sudden. Yeah, Ben-Hur definitely won Best Picture. The other four nominees are, you know, Anatomy of a Murder, The Diary of Anne Frank, Room at the Top, and The Nun's Story. So, you know, Ben-Hur certainly a notable movie, but we certainly also have it lower on the list.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, little boy. Why? All right. Anyway, but yeah, like so, it's this is one of the greatest comedies of all time, I think, and it's just a remarkable movie. It's very funny. It aged really well. It's got great people in it. It's just really good. It's not trying to do anything groundbreaking. It's just trying to be really funny and entertaining, and boy, does it accomplish that.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Oh, we've got in chat. We've got uh, Fox Pixar Media saying, "What about Flying High in 1980? Did that win Best Picture, or in case of the film, Worst Picture?" I, I don't know that one. I mean, I'm not sure. It sounds like it was a joke that maybe it wasn't a great movie, but I haven't actually, I don't know it, so I can't really comment on the joke aspect of it. Flying High.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's see. Oh, well, there's a 1978 Flying High, but in what also comes up, honestly, is Airplane from
Airplane.
1980.
Yeah.
But there is a movie from 1978 called Flying High. Um, the high flying adventures of three sexy airline stewardesses. Anyway, so I don't know. Do you have anything else you wanted to say about Some Like It Hot?
No, I
Yeah.
think that covers it.
All right, great. So, with that said, let's move on to number 21, Chinatown. And everyone, prepare your necks for some whiplash. Especially given that, some of what we were talking about with Some Like It Hot is how well it has aged in all these sorts of things. But not that Chinatown the movie has aged poorly in that regard, but certainly when we're talking about Chinatown, it's a 1974 drama, very much in the school of old 1940s film noir, even though it was made in the mid 70s, starring Jack Nicholson and investigating, basically the same mystery as Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Um, I mean that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is essentially the Chinatown plot. I mean, it's kind of uncanny how similar they are. I mean, I
Oh,
shouldn't even say it's uncanny. It's intentional. I'm 100% sure.
yes.
Yeah. But in any event, the we have
I
the
mean, both
thing.
things are
Oh,
accurate though. Like,
oh yeah.
and yeah, I mean, I just read an article recently about how getting the Olympics there in the whatever it was, the 20s or 30s, was what kind of put Los Angeles from like this weird desert outpost
Hmm.
into like what it's become. Like the evolution of Los Angeles in the 30s is an actual big thing. So
Yeah. So the thing that there is to comment on regarding Chinatown before we get too much into the movie itself is that it is directed by Roman Polanski, who is a controversial figure. We talked about we have a similar sort of scenario as we did when we talked about Annie Hall with Woody Allen, who is a controversial person in his private life, and the question of how well can you, or how should you consider the art separately from the artist. So with Roman Polanski, it's a fact that he essentially admitted to statutory rape with a 13-year-old girl and had fled prosecution in the United States to France and has been living there since, fighting extradition. And that is an active thing. That's not like a he said, she said accusation where the details are muddy. I mean, it's not even really in question that he did it. He just doesn't think he should have to go to jail for it.
right,
And so the problem then becomes he's still making movies. So in this sort of day and age, when we're talking about, where Harvey Weinstein's going to jail, other, prominent film stars or whatever are, the whole, where they're losing work. Kevin Spacey gets cut out of a movie, stuff like that. So at the same time, why is Roman Polanski still making movies and getting celebrated for them? That is a complicated question, and it's the truth is, when it comes to separating art from artist, that's a line that everyone has to kind of draw on their own, right? There's going to be a lot of people for whom the knowledge of what Roman Polanski did just means flat out they're not going to be able to enjoy any of his movies. Like they won't be able to forget about that when watching, and it just going to color everything and ruin it. And that's a
Right.
fair reaction. Like there's,
Right.
you know, anyone is entitled to feel that way, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to the extent that you can separate art from artist, especially in film, which is such a collaborative work, right? So just because you have a prominent filmmaker involved does not mean that there weren't lots of other people working on a film. And so, you know, at a certain point you say, well, okay, do you just strike a otherwise good film from the canon because of the actions of the director? Well, maybe not. That's a decision everyone has to kind of make. But so it's certainly true that he is in the news again recently because his newest film won some awards in the French César Awards, which are like the French Oscars. But there was controversy there. People, like the film, the board of that organization resigned in the controversy, and a bunch of people walked out of the awards ceremony because it happened. Like that stuff's real, and I think it's important to acknowledge that if we're going to be talking about a Roman Polanski movie. But all of those things acknowledged, I think we're going to talk about the movie as separate from that, and not necessarily look at it through that lens. But that's also not the same thing as forgetting that that stuff happened also.
Correct. Yeah, I think we both agree. We acknowledge those things exist. Um, Obviously, not fans of what Roman Polanski did.
Yeah.
Respect people who can't watch his movies because of what he did. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, we're going to divorce our conversation from that, and not bring it up in our analysis of the movie, basically. So, okay.
Sorry, my dog is all worked up now. He's
I know,
also angry about Roman Polanski.
My dog just likes bird dogs.
So, one of the things that I think is fascinating watching Chinatown is that even though it was made sort of like 30 years after like the heyday of, hard-boiled detective film noir movies, it nonetheless feels almost like the archetypal film noir, except for being in color instead of black and white.
Yes, it does a phenomenal. I mean, Chinatown. So now that we're talking just specifically about the movie, Chinatown may be one of the smartest movies I think I've ever watched. There's that acknowledgement of. The way that it plays to every stereotype or trope of a film noir, but not doing it as like it's not like a Pulp Fiction kind of thing. Like it's within the actual context of the movie. Like it's not doing it. It's paying homage without like leaning in or tipping its hat to how it's paying homage.
Mm-hmm.
It demands a lot out of the audience to really be invested in like the subtleties of the conversations and the subtleties of like the dialogue, and it delivers a dialogue that is so tight from beginning to end, and everything in the movie matters, like literally every piece of it, to the point where things that we're not even expecting, like our initial revelation is mostly looking out for people whose husbands and wives are cheating on them, and like that's kind of his his lane
Yeah.
that we learn later isn't where he started, that he actually started in a much more altruistic role working for the DA in Chinatown, which obviously bookends the movie. But he got so frustrated with what he was doing when he thought he was right, and why it's like his whole controversy with the with the lieutenant is that he feels like he kind of saw how everything was corrupted and stepped away from it, and his friend, who is also a good cop, is in it but just obtuse to the corruption. And like there's this like this whole weird subtlety to all of this.
I wouldn't have described his friend as obtuse to it. I feel like it's not like he doesn't know. I feel like it's more a matter of deciding it's still better to work within that system than outside of it.
Yeah. Okay. So obtuse is probably the wrong word there. Yeah. We're thinking about the same thing. Like he's aware of it, but he's choosing to like still fight the battle that way.
Right.
Where Jake has decided to fight the battle a different way. But anyway, like to the point of like how tight the movie is, one of the things that's establishing that is his first client. You know, Carl, he has photos of his wife sleeping with another man.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's all exposition. It's like, oh, here's what he does for a job, and here is his sort of bedside manner and how he counsels people who find this stuff out and tries to help them out. And like he's genuinely a good guy, even though he's doing this kind of dirty work for people. To the fact that then we use Carl way later in the movie in his elaborate like contrivance of how he's gonna like get away with everything and like help the people he wants to help out while get the bad guys in jail. And like he has this like super elaborate plan that involves him being dropped off at Carl's house, and then the extra subtlety of Carl's wife having a black eye, which is like just, it was not necessary, but it tells you so much about this. Like Carl's still with his wife who is cheating on him. He's just now beating her, which like doesn't make it okay, but it's like this weird texture that like just exists in the movie.
Yeah.
That you're just like, wow, like why is that even necessary? Like, but okay. And then, you know, and then of course the fact that his epic plan of like making all this stuff work fails epically, and all that happens is that this guy can just say, yeah, well, Jake, just go home, man. It's Chinatown. It's like, you tried.
Yeah.
So I know I try to cover a lot in there.
No. I like it, but one of the things that kind of intrigued me about that is calling it his epic plan, because I kind of see a lot of the movie and that whole final sequence that you're talking about not as though it's this epic, intricate, elaborate plan, as much as he is very smart, but is only just barely staying ahead of everybody else. He is always thinking one step ahead, but that's it. And I feel like he is constantly just doing the next thing he can think of. And he's so smart that he's usually able to stay just ahead of the cresting wave, but only just. And then eventually it comes to the point where it's all coming to a head. Everything's falling apart. He makes his last desperate pitch to his friends to say, this is what's happening. I'm telling you, I figured it out. He's right there. Just stop him. And he just can't quite make the sale, and it all falls apart.
Yeah, yes. I think those are just, I think you and I are seeing the same things.
Yeah.
They're just nuanced like ways to look at it, whereas I felt like this was more of because of how he had this whole thing laid out, he's like, oh, they're going to go to this attach, and you're going to go to this address, and then I'm going to go here. Like, here's my plan for how I'm going to get him to use his bifocals. And like, you know, felt to me like he thought he had this really great plan, and
But
it just could never come together. But to your point,
yeah,
it could also be his really great plan was really just one step ahead of everybody else, that
right.
he just wasn't quite, couldn't make the final sale.
Because
Yeah.
remember, he was wrong about the bifocals at first. He thought they were Mulrays, and he
Right.
confronted Mrs. Mulray, confronted Evelyn about it, and it was only after he got her to admit everything about Catherine that she said, "Those aren't his. He didn't wear bifocals."
Right. And so that's where I felt like he decided to create this plan, because he he starts there by telling them to go one place, and then he calls his partner and tells them to do this, and he starts, at that point is when he starts to set everything in motion. And to your
Mm-hmm.
point, it could be that he's only setting things in motion at this point because he has to stay one step ahead of
Yeah,
everybody. But I was describing it as like, once he decided that he was on Catherine and Evelyn's side, he created a plan that he thought would get them out of there.
yeah. But again, I think that plan was a relatively like like in that moment he knew, I'm here confronting her, and the police are right behind me because I thought they were going to come and arrest her. But now I realize it's not what I thought. It's something else. I do want to let her go. I do want to try to catch this other guy, but the police are still coming. They're not going to believe me yet because I don't have anything. I just have my suspicion. So I just need a way to buy time. And so he sends her in one direction, and then he tells them this other thing. And like, he doesn't know that this former client is going to be home and available to drive him off. I mean, he calls his partners to basically say, there's a good chance I'm going to be arrested in a few minutes. Right?
Yep.
So like, and so he's basically, he doesn't know if he's going to be able to pull it off. He is just literally trying to just keep the plate spinning as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah.
Well, no, you're not wrong either, though. Just in the sense of watching him do this plate spinning high wire act, it's astonishing how long he's able to keep it up, and that he is so smart that he is able to stay one step ahead. Like so what you're saying is not wrong. It's just a question of like how much was planned ahead. Is I think that it's a remarkable improvisation in the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. But what I also really like in the same vein as what you're saying in terms of just how smart the movie is that um, I really love all of the classic detective work that goes on and all these little tricks, like buying the cheap watches and putting it under the wheel of the car so you know when how long the car stays there,
Yep.
and having your buddy take the pictures, and just the great clue, the nuance of, oh, the only word I could hear them say was apple core, but then later you realize the albacore club is this important thing, and that's surely what they were actually arguing about. But you couldn't. How could you have known it was albacore if before you knew about the club? And so learning that, and then just doing all the work of like going to the Hall of Records, and like he doesn't know, like, why are there these extra little flaps on there? I have to ask about that. And but getting can I borrow a ruler? I like to read along, and I didn't bring my glasses, and so but he's really using it to tear out the page.
Yep.
All of that stuff, and even just the little things that he does without explaining
Or
it to the
kicking
audience.
taillight out.
Yeah, that's another example I was just going to say is that the cleverness of using that so it's easier to follow the car at night.
From afar. Yeah,
Yeah,
from afar. Yeah.
yeah, and it's great stuff. And yet, one of the things that we talked about way back when we talked about Raiders of the Lost Ark was how with action stars, there's frequently a case of like, is this a character who makes everything look easy, or a character that makes everything look hard. And Indiana Jones is a character who makes everything look hard, but he's doing it anyway, right? And I think in the same vein, and in the same vein as a lot of classic hard-boiled detective fiction, Jake gets his ass kicked a lot.
Yes.
Um,
I mean, it's half the movie he spends with his nose sliced.
yeah. And just the bit of trivia that people could know if they didn't is that the character with the knife that slices Jack Nicholson's nose is actually played by director Roman Polanski. Yeah. So he gets beat up by the dumb Okies in the orange groves, which again, just in a little bit of cross movie synchronicity, Okies working in orange groves in California ties into Grapes of Wrath, right? It's like that's what that was about. Anyway, but the gets beat up by them. He gets, roughed up by the other guys. There's the fight in, at that ridiculously fancy old folks home. That the whole premise of it was that these people in there are not actually rich, and yet they live in like that place was pretty fancy for supposedly non-rich pensioners to live.
Right, because the Albacore is their unofficial charity that, like, basically the implication is that Albacore is funding the home to be able to use their names to buy the land deeds.
Yes, exactly. And just like the little tips and tricks of how he gets in there and gets ingratiated with the guy of like this home does not allow people of the Jewish persuasion, does it? Just playing into the expected racism from the guy, and of course it's valid, like in the sense that he's right that the guy is like that. And then
he was even trying to be even more clever with that. He was hoping to use that as his reason to request the names of the people who live there. But he played all that off. So his hope was, oh, well, you don't accept Jewish people. Well, can I see the roster of your people? Because my dad also doesn't want to come here and live with Jewish people. So can I see all their last names? And the guy says, no, obviously, like it's confidential. And he responds, he goes, exactly what I was hoping you would say.
Yeah. And yeah. Just because I'm thinking of it at the moment, the one area that I will say in the movie that I reacted with, I think, an emotion entirely different than what the movie really wanted me to feel was during the scene where Jake and Evelyn sleep together and make out first, and I just could not get past kissing him with his nose sliced up like that. It just seemed so awful because simultaneously it had to really hurt for him, and it would be super gross for her to be pressing her face up against that. I could not get over it. It did not feel romantic in the slightest for me. It grossed me out too much. I just no, ew, yuck. Let it heal.
Agreed.
Put a Band-Aid on it at least. Jeez. Because they had the stitches open and everything. It's literally bloody.
He was wearing a Band-Aid. He just kept getting beat up.
Yeah.
So
he had a hand. No, I don't even mean necessarily that. Like, I mean, it's like I'm just saying, she's pressing her face right there. Like, just I could not find that scene romantic. Rocket, come on, little boy. Apologies to the listeners who are hearing my little dog here. Here, I'll pick up the cute little dog for the camera. All right, so people watching the video get to see this cute little dog that's barking and understand that he's so cute, and that's why you shouldn't be mad. Little boy. We'll be going out before too long. But, yeah, so the mystery in this movie is incredible. It's just the way it starts small with, what feels like yet another of the standard cliche case of, the cheating husband, we're taking pictures. But then it's weird because the guy is not doing any of that. Here, vamp for a second while I deal with this little dog. I'll be right back. I'm not taking him outside or anything. I just need to fuss.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Little dog. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, the movie is, like I said, it's maybe the smartest movie I've ever watched because it puts so much onus on the viewer to pay attention to what's happening and the way that it puzzles together the ultimate, like, end piece is slow building, like Chris was saying. Like, we start with, oh, well, you're just going to follow my husband, who is actually her husband. Like, she's a plant, which is one of the other layers of the mystery. And his mistress, who it turns out isn't actually his mistress, it's his wife, sister, daughter, because of a rape from her father. That's where a lot of the tension, outside of just the financial implications of the way they're manipulating the water, is, there's this extra layer of this family tension of the father wanting to be a part of the granddaughter's life and them trying to keep that from her, and the chief engineer being like a father figure to the, I'm talking about some of the complexities of the relationships, and, like, the fact that, like, it wasn't actually his mistress, it was his wife's rape daughter with her father that he's, like, being a father figure to. And that's part of the tension between him and his business partner. Yes, ultimately it's the financial piece, but there's this extra layer of the fact that, like, the father / grandfather wants to be a part of the girl's life, and he won't let her, or he and his daughter won't let her, won't let him be a part of her life. Sorry. And so that's where their actual argument is. Like, that's the blow up. But yet there's also the fight, like, the complexity of, like, it's not just financial. And also there's some clever lines in there from Geddes about, like, how much are you worth? Like, what does this do? Like, how many more dinners can you buy?
Yeah.
And it's not about that. And I think that is part of what makes this movie, like, stand the test of time, is that sometimes these things aren't about that. Like, it's not about the actual dollars. It's about the power and about the vision and about all of these things. And then also this extra layer of, like, wanting to be a part of his weird relationship with his daughter and his granddaughter, who's also his daughter. Yeah,
it's just this control that he feels entitled to. And he's just such a he's so awful, which makes him such a great villain and just makes the ending all the more horrific. When Evelyn is killed, and the last time we see Catherine is with this guy drawing her away, saying, "Oh no, don't look. I'm here, come away with me." And it's just like we see in Jack Nicholson's face, and like, this is an example of Jack Nicholson being a great actor, that on the one hand it's almost like his face is just blank, but in context and just the subtleties of his performance, we can see he is a hair's breadth from just losing it and just trying to murder the guy right there. But, like, I think literally the only thing that stops him is knowing that he wouldn't be able to do it. He would be physically prevented, and nothing would happen. Wouldn't make any difference.
Yeah, and there's some odd subtleties to like the way that all goes down too. Like the fact that like his former partner, whatever the guy was with him, the lieutenant, starts to shoot, and he like tackles him and like stops
Mm-hmm.
him from shooting at the car, and then
Yeah.
his deputy comes and starts shooting at the car. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like
It's just bad luck. I mean, it was a
it's just
desperate
all bad
shot.
luck. Like, you get why, like, she just shot a guy in the
Mm-hmm.
street, and yes, we know all the layers as to what brought her to like shoot John
Yeah.
Huston's character,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like these guys, we've been bought in that these are good policemen, that are aware of the corruption and like trying to live above it, but yet a woman just pulled a gun and opened fire on a guy
Yeah.
in the street.
A very rich, important guy.
Right. Like they can't just look the other way.
Right.
And and so you understand their position,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that again, it's part of what makes it so smart is that there's no one in the movie that you don't understand their motivation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, there's mystery for a while where we're not
There's
sure
a
what's
lot
going
of
on.
mystery, but when
But
it
yeah.
all unfolds, like you kind of get where everybody's coming from,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, you obviously like you feel like that John Huston's like you're given in that he's a terrible person. I mean, he even says as much. Like, what the benefit I have that other people don't have is that I've found out what I'm truly capable of, or whatever. Like he says, like
Yeah.
some really
Well,
awful shit about how he finds out when he's pressed to the wall, he'll kill people,
yeah.
um, and rape
Well,
his
and
daughter and
all
all
of
that.
that's specifically in the context of, and now you're going to take me to where Evelyn and Catherine are, or we'll kill you. Right?
Right.
It's like you thought you had one up on me by coming here and pretending like, oh, now you know everything, but you showed up here where I can threaten you with a gun and force you to do what I want.
Exactly.
Maybe that
So
wasn't a great plan after all.
so we still we get where he's coming from and that he's just this awful person, but like at the end of it, like yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
there's all the detectives where we're like we get where they're coming from too, and
Mm-hmm.
while we know there's so much more to this than they're allowing to understand, you also get it. Like there's a scene where the cop comes running down the thing and he's like, "Hey, I just talked to the chief engineer, and he says that yeah, there's some standard runoff, and that Jake Geddes knows all of this
Mm-hmm.
and has been making these irresponsible accusations. Like that's a legitimate thing for them to believe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy, he's right. He did tell him that was why the water was running off,
Mm-hmm.
and he is running around pseudo irresponsibly, like making these claims, even if
Mm-hmm.
they we know real. So, but you get like the nuance of all of it, and again, it's just so much of this. It's such a smart movie.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Just in terms of nuance, just in the filmmaking, a perfect little example that I noticed during that scene where he's confronting John Huston is there's there's the concept of the 180 rule in terms of when you have two characters talking to each other, you try to stay on one side of them, otherwise it feels like they switch places, right?
Right.
Well, this that scene starts in one position where we have Jake on the left in the quote stronger position and John Huston on the right when Jake is saying, "Hey, you want to read this article for me?" And so I'm going to cleverly prove that you use bifocals and then I'm going to use that to call you out on killing this guy. And then as basically he kind of just, reveals like, you think you can prove it? So what? I don't care. I don't think you can. I'm going to show you that I actually still have all the power in this situation, and it flips. It starts shooting the scene from the other side, and it shows the reversal of the power dynamic there. And I mean, that just makes the complexity of, Jake's feelings at the very end all the more complicated, because he knows, like, it was at the threat of his own life, but he's the one that took him there. Like, they might have gotten away if he could have stalled longer or driven him somewhere else or something. And like, no
Yes.
one really blames him because it was at gunpoint, but he knows if he could have figured something else out, maybe it would have worked out. They
Yes.
almost got away as it was.
To the point, like where we were talking about whether it was a contrived plan or a keeping the plate spinning or whatever. Like the reality is, he put everyone in that location in Chinatown.
Yeah.
All of the players who led to Evelyn's death and John Huston's character, or John, whatever his name is, John Cross, taking Catherine. All of the things that he was the one who put everyone there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's heartbreaking for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and especially because it's all just tied, like you said, just thematically, where we establish at the beginning that he was this former DA. Now he's turned, sleazy private detective. Now we see how defensive he is about that. In the scene at the barber shop where the mortgage banker tells him, like, a hell of a way to make a living, and he defends it. It's like, I help people out in a desperate situation, and he's really kind of frustrated about it. But at the same time, we see that he has, by being frustrated with the corruption he saw, he basically let himself be removed from the picture and just kind of does the cynical thing, the cynical, easy thing that he's good at that doesn't require complicated moral decisions of him, right? But then by getting involved in this case, far beyond where he has to, right? Because if you think about it, the fake Mrs. Mulray hires him to begin with. He takes the pictures, and he knows that something's weird about it. But then the real Mrs. Mulray shows up. Evelyn tells him, I didn't ever hire you. You were tricked. He could have just let it go, right? But it was him feeling like, wait a minute. If I got tricked, I can't let that stand. I need to figure out why that happened.
Right. Somebody wanted to get at your husband, and I want to learn what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, no one's even paying him to do that. It's just, it's a point of personal pride.
Yep.
And so, and then at that point, like, getting deeper and deeper involved in this, he's really getting more to the point where he's doing all this because it's the right thing to do, not because he actually gets anything out of it. And at the same time, I have a dog barking at me, and at the same time, you have all of the other forces arrayed, the forces of evil arrayed in this corrupt city, lining up against him to try to say, you're sticking your neck up, where it doesn't belong, and
the nose.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just going to get punished, and we're going to tell people that you're doing it for all of these crass, cynical reasons anyway. Rocket. Oh my God. I really should have taken him out before we started this, but oh well, it's in hindsight, right? In any event, though, for him to be coming out of his cynicism, and then finally, when he learns the truth from Evelyn about what her whole situation really is, he puts himself at substantial risk for no real gain at all to try to let her get away, out of just pure, like, that's what he feels like is the right thing to do. And then by the end, it's demonstrated to him that the forces of evil in this corrupt place were just too strong for him. He couldn't make it happen even when he tried his hardest. And again, it just comes back down to exactly how he felt when he was at the DA. It's like, doesn't matter how hard you try. It's Chinatown.
Right. I mean, and God, I mean, it's obviously that line has permeated like movie lore. Like it's such a great closing line,
Hmm.
and it's so good. Like we should just talk about like why that line is so good because while it occurs in Chinatown, like that's the whole point. Is it isn't Chinatown. Like
Yeah. It's
they've
not
just
about Chinatown as like in and of itself a place. Like it doesn't have anything to do with people of Chinese descent living in America.
right. What they're basically using is just any way to like get through it and get to the next day. It's like Jake, man, like this corruption, it's just
Hmm.
it's and it's part of why the movie's so smart and so tight. Like it's tying it back to like the joke he was telling earlier, like the joke he heard at the barber shop
Hmm.
about like how the Chinaman has like sex with his wife and
Yeah.
like how he found that a really funny joke. Like it's just sort of like there's this weird racist dismissiveness to
Yeah.
like the Chinaman. And it's like, oh well, this all just happened in Chinatown, so like forget about it. And
Hmm.
it's like, well, in his mind, like, yes, no, it's way bigger than Chinatown. Like the only reason this happened in Chinatown is because I like directed everybody to come to Chinatown.
Yeah.
It's not a Chinatown thing. Like this
Yeah.
is a
Because one of Evelyn Mulray's most trusted he was like a butler or something. What was his deal? He was the guy who was staying there with Catherine.
yeah. I
Like
mean, it was her butler or whatever
yeah.
you call
So but like
that.
it was
Yeah.
going to his house is where they were hiding. That's the only reason it happened in Chinatown there at the end, right?
Right, and the tie is that he and the detective had both worked in Chinatown, and that was where they went to divergent paths,
Yeah.
and that they both worked in the DA's office, and now one of them is a lieutenant in the police force outside of Chinatown, and one of them is a private investigator who looks for people's dirty laundry, as they said.
Yeah.
But both of them started in Chinatown.
Hmm.
And so that end cap is really, really just again, it's just such a smart movie, and that literally none of that has to do with Chinatown.
Right.
What they're trying to say is like
Yeah.
sometimes shit happens, man, and we just have to walk away.
Yeah.
You know?
And like what his friend the cop is kind of saying and telling him to go home because like it's his investigation like hire his photographer guy that says forget it Jake, it's Chinatown, but it's his friend the cop that's telling him to go home. It's like, I'm doing you a favor. And on the one hand, it's the opposite of what Jake wants because he's essentially saying you and I know that the real guilty party here is going to get away with it because this is all going to get brushed under the rug. And neither of us think that's a good thing, but I'm the one that thinks that's just how it has to be. And I am allowing you to separate yourself from the mess that this is going to be. And so that's why it's a favor. But at that moment, Jake's just feeling like, I've come to a point in this case where I cannot be okay with that anymore. And yet, what are you going to do? There's nothing
Right.
to be done. Nothing he does can change the outcome at this point. Forget it, Jake.
It's Chinatown.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way that they build his relationship with Evelyn too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because a sloppier movie would make it where he had fallen in love with her
Mm-hmm.
at the end, and that's why he was so like upset.
Yeah.
He's yes, he's had sex with her, but he's not in love with her.
Mm-hmm.
Like
He's not proposing that they run away together.
right, he just has become a part of her world and like sees what she's trying to do and wants to help her and her situation. Like
Yeah.
it's different. And again, like I said, it's just I keep saying it, but
Yeah. Well,
it's such a clever movie.
yeah, I definitely it really is, and it's just got all of these archetypal film noir sorts of detective fiction things, but all just kind of hard boiled together into just this really incredible little movie
Yes,
that it's a shame was directed by a crazy. So anyway,
exactly.
um,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, but yeah.
Technically, the one Oscar that this movie won was Best Writing Original Screenplay by Robert Towne. Um, and it was nominated for a whole bunch of other things, including Best Picture, Best Actor in a Leading Role, Best Actress in a Leading Role, Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, Best Music. It was nominated for all of those things, but it came out the same year as Godfather Part 2, which swept most of those categories, I
Mm.
think. So it's an interesting question though, just to compare the two, because Godfather Part Two is, it was higher up on the list here. So I don't know, like we talked about Godfather Part Two, and you're a bigger fan of it than I am, which is not to say that I think it's bad, but what's your take on these two? Do you think which do you think deserves to be higher? Closer to the top of the list, Godfather Part Two or Chinatown?
So I mean, it's tricky because I do have Godfather Part Two pretty high up. So when I gave my effusions about Godfather Part Two, I hadn't
Hmm.
rewatched Chinatown, and man, I mean, it is just like I'm just repeating myself at this point, though. Like
Sure,
it is just such a smart movie,
it's a
and
good movie. It inspires enthusiasm.
yes, and it always makes me think. I've seen the movie however many times, probably 10 times, and I know the broad strokes of what's going to happen, but it still makes me think through like every piece of evidence and like how does this lead to like what is he getting at, like how does this all play together, because of course the end result isn't satisfying from the like linking all the pieces together, because yes, you have the broad strokes of like this is what these guys were doing to influence this part of the real estate market, and here's how they were doing all of this. But at the end of it, you're just kind of left with like, well, shit, they kind of got away with it.
No,
Like,
I mean it's a tragic ending for sure.
yeah,
Like
it's so tragic.
he solves the mystery, but does not save any of the people or catch any of the bad guys.
Right. So, I don't know. There's just something that when you watch Chinatown
Hmm.
and you leave Chinatown, you you have like just this different level of respect for that movie.
Mm.
I I think there are things about Godfather 2 that I think are better made movie, but this movie is, we were able to divorce this from like what
Yeah,
like Roman Polanski, because like I would hate to not be able to be a fan of this movie
right.
because it's so smart and so tight and so nuanced in a way that, yeah, like I'm gonna leave it where it is, so it's gonna be a couple of spots above Godfather 2 on my list,
Hmm.
but I do really like Godfather 2, but
Hey, that's allowed. Believe it or not.
this movie really just inspires me to be like
Yeah.
every time I watch it, I'm like,
Hmm.
God, I feel smarter. Like even though I didn't learn anything, like the way the movie makes your brain work
Hmm.
to put all the pieces together, like we say it lays it all out for you, but it doesn't really. Like you have to piece a lot of this together.
Hmm. Well, it really has us in the dark, or rather, it keeps us exactly where Jake is. You even
Hmm.
a little bit behind sometimes because frequently we see him do things before we know why.
Yes.
But yeah, it's great stuff. So let's talk about where these two movies belong on the list. And I'm also going to just go ahead and briefly give Fox Pixar Media in the chat the attention that they're clearly looking for, which is by running a constant commentary chat all about the Airplane movies and trying to connect everything we said to either Airplane 2 or Airplane 3, a hypothetical Airplane 3, or all of that. So, I mean, I'm not sure what's going on there exactly, but I mean, I admire their persistence.
Cool.
Um, but yeah, so let's talk about it. Do you know where you want to move Some Like It Hot in Chinatown?
So I'm going to leave Chinatown where it is.
All right.
Um, and I'm going to drop Some Like It Hot down below. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it below To Kill a Mockingbird, but above All About Eve.
Okay.
That way it makes it still the highest ranked comedy on my list.
Mm-hmm.
I believe so. Yep. Still the highest ranked comedy.
Okay. Oops. We'll get that moved down. Leave Chinatown where it is. And so you maintain Chinatown at number 21. Some Like It Hot now at number 31. I'm going to move Some Like It Hot. Let's see. I'm going to move it. I think, I'm going to put it right after another comedy, but that's just where I feel like I want it. Is I'm going to put it right after His Girl Friday and above Grapes of Wrath on my list.
Yeah.
Um, Making this gap there. Chinatown. Um, let's see. Where do I want that? It's so good. I think I'm going to put it between. Oh, boy. You know what? I think I'm going to put it between Treasure of the Sierra Madre and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So it's still pretty high.
Yep. Oh, excuse me real quick.
All right. And so that leaves uh, so that puts Some Like It Hot at 27 and Chinatown at 30. So that is going to update our spreadsheet there.
Perfect.
And so as we look ahead, we've cracked the top 20, or rather we will next time.
Yep.
Because our next two movies at number 20 is It's a Wonderful Life, the 1946 Capra holiday classic. And then number 19, On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando from 1954, which is one of the few remaining movies on the list that we haven't both seen already.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see how long it takes us to get to that one. Hopefully, we will get to it a little more promptly. We say that a lot, but we're going to do our best. But there's a lot of good movies out there to watch, everybody. So stay tuned to the podcast feed. You'll know when we do the next one. And in the meantime, go watch good movies.
Go watch good movies.